Hey folks, Dr. D here. Today, what I want to talk about is the art of raising capital. I haven't ever met an entrepreneur that hasn't suggested to me that their biggest challenge is raising capital. And there's a lot of elements to raising capital. I'm going to start with some of the nuts and bolts. Number one is you've got to figure out how much money you need to raise. And of course, that's a function of sort of where you are in the life cycle of the business. If you are in the startup phase, the best way to figure out how much money you need to raise is to do some sort of financial forecast and get a sense of what the cash needs are going to be as you go through the motions of building your company in the first year, 2 years, and hopefully within that period of time, somewhere along the way, you get to cash flow break even, where now you are using the internally generated capital to continue to grow your company. But in those early stages, let's say before you even begun to generate revenue, you've got to figure out, well, how much money do I need to raise? And this is quite important. I'll tell you in a moment how to do that. But first of all, let's talk about why it's so important to get that as close as you possibly can to being accurate. And what does it mean to be accurate, right? Well, the number one rule of thumb to follow is that you need enough capital to be able to achieve the milestones that you've set out. And hopefully the capital that you're raising is going to get you to cash flow break even. That should be the milestone that you're attempting to achieve, right? And so what we call that, when you raise money that helps you get to that coveted cash flow break even, we call that being adequately capitalized, right? So the point of why that is so important is because the capital markets are very sensitive, right? The people that actually invest in ventures, they're very sensitive to your ability to be able to deliver on the numbers that you put before them when they invest, right? So if you say to the investors, I am adequately capitalized at $1 million, right? Let's just use that as a nice round figure. And they come up with $1 million of investment, and turns out, whoops, guess what? 3 months later, you realize I'm not going to make the numbers. I'm not going to get the cash flow break even when I thought I was. So I need to raise more money. So you can imagine how the investors are going to feel after throwing $1 million at you. And now you come back 3 months later and you say, whoops, you know what? I didn't forecast very well. Things happened in the world that, I didn't foresee. And so can you give me more money? Right. And the capital markets, being as small as they are going to be talking, and it's going to be very difficult to go back and say, I made some errors and I need more money right now, 3, 4, 6 months after I began. So you want to be adequately capitalized so that you raise enough money so that you don't have to return to those capital markets too soon because of that sensitivity. So the other danger, of course, is to be undercapitalized, which is a real common problem for a lot of entrepreneurs, where you don't raise enough capital and you never gave yourself a fighting chance to get to that cash flow break even. And so make sure that you raise enough money that you're going to be able to get to that level. Now, of course, the trade-off that you have, and business is always about trade-offs, is that when you raise let's say you want to be adequately capitalized, and you don't have a real high valuation in those early days, raising more money means diluting the equity stake of your company a little bit more. So perhaps then you look at the mix of the capital that you're raising from debt and equity, right? So that you don't have to give up too much ownership. The other problem on the other side is to be overcapitalized, right? And you think, well, how can anybody be overcapitalized? Having too much money, that's almost an oxymoron, right? Extra money is like, jumbo shrimp. And the problem with being overcapitalized is that companies that do that have a tendency not to develop really strong internal financial controls. If I'm awash in cash and I've got an embarrassment of riches, I'm less likely to put in place all of the tight financial controls that are going to help me manage this business as it continues to scale, to watch my capital and my cash and my expenses and so on, so that I'm building a really efficient business over time, right? So there's 3 things to think about, right? Number one is, how do I get adequately capitalized? How much money do I need to raise? How do I avoid being undercapitalized? And that means you have to think about, the mix of, sort of the financial stack, if you will, some debt, some equity, so I don't dilute too much. Don't overburden my company with debt payments, interest payments. And then avoid being overcapitalized, because that takes away from your efficiencies and some of the controls and disciplines that you'll put in place to really help your business scale and grow to even greater levels. Now, finally, how much money do you need to raise? Well, the way to do it is run your financial forecast, right? And there's other videos that we've done on financial forecasting, and do a 3-year financial forecast and take a look at your cash flow statement. And let's say you've done all the hard work. The numbers are great, very believable, tethered to reality. And you take a look at your cash flow statement, you find your worst negative cash position, your worst negative ending cash position, right? Any given month. Let's say it's minus $250,000. Well, then the rule of thumb is, in order to make sure that you are adequately capitalized, you have to raise at least twice that amount to be adequately capitalized. That means that you're going to have to raise $500,000. Okay. The worst negative cash position, maybe month number 8 was negative 250 ending cash. I've got to raise twice that amount to be adequately capitalized. That's just a rule of thumb. And that means that I've given myself a little slack, that some of my assumptions about sales might be off, some of my assumptions about costs might be off, and this is going to make sure that I'm adequately capitalized, and I'll be able to justify that when I go to raise capital in the capital markets.